Good afternoon and welcome. Thanks everybody for coming. We appreciate your time. I'm Brad Power. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the director of the Community Development Department here in Englewood. And I want to welcome you to the presentation of the results of the Urban Land Institute Technical Advisory Panel that's been working here in town for the last 2 days. I can attest from having been with them all day yesterday and seen them work today. They put in some amazing hours. They interviewed over 30 people yesterday for what you're about to see. I've had a long-standing association with ULI. I've been a member for over 25 years, and I've been in several leadership roles both in the state and nationally. And it's just a great organization to have in our community and have the ability to interact with. And so I don't want to belabor it because we were a little bit late with some of the technical challenges that we were working on. And I want to turn it over immediately so we can get into the heart of the program to Marilee Utter. Marilee is a longtime ULI member, former executive staff member with ULI nationally, and she's now president of City Venture Associates right here in Denver. And so I will turn it over to the TAP chair, Marilee Utter.
Thank you very much. And welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for coming. To Planning Commission members, to council members, to the mayor, and most importantly to this community, to the residents and the people that live and work here. Let me tell you a little bit about the Urban Land Institute. I'll make it a two-liner. Eric, can you hit it? Great. The Urban Land Institute is actually almost 80 years old. It's a nonprofit, global nonprofit, 75 offices around the world. And we're dedicated, our mission is to provide leadership in the responsible use of land and in creating and sustaining thriving communities worldwide. So it's known because it's independent. Our members are interdisciplinary because we're building communities. And as you know, it takes people from all disciplines to takes a village, as they say. So our members are people that are developers, they are planners, they're mayors, public sector people, they are attorneys, finance people, all of us coming together saying, what's the best way to build our community? Our mission statement has nothing about membership, nothing about money, it's all about communities. And we like being global because we like to take the best practices from one community to the other and share best practices. So the work that you've done in Englewood 16 years ago on City Center, won many awards, and it's a case study we've taken to other communities as they've gotten underway. Now we're into phase 2. One of the hallmark programs that ULI does around the world are advisory panels, where a community invites us in and says, we have an urban problem, will you give us your advice? And this is what we're doing here, the technical advisory panels. Globally, we've done over 600 of them around the world. Here in Colorado, we've done 50 of them. And we call on our members who serve as volunteers. They don't get paid. They're kind of prohibited from working, so there's no conflict of interest. And our opinions are totally independent. We have no skin in the game other than we care about cities and about your city too. Let's move on. Eric? Let me introduce briefly the panelists that you'll be meeting today. As Brad said, I'm the president of City Venture Associates here in Denver. Jim Charlier, nationally known expert, works all over the country, does a lot of advisory work for the APA as well as other clients on multimodal transportation, transit, and complete streets. Mark Goldberg is president of Goldberg Properties, a well-known developer, a long history both in retail and residential. Erica Heller, vice president with Puma, really strong economic development skills and planning skills, works all over the country, and a lot of work on special districts and smaller communities. Mark Lease, 35 years of design experience, planning, working in the public sector and the private sector, so he brings those two together. And is that everybody? No, James, did we miss one? Yeah, Sarah and James, you're not here. Well, let me introduce, sorry, we missed that slide. So Sarah is an attorney, we say with about 100 years of experience because she's a well-known attorney in town, worked on lots of TODs, lots of master plans, worked with lots of communities. And James is a retail expert working around the world, works for a private developer, Continuum Corporation, and works for them on leasing their spaces. So a great panel. Quickly, when we do these panels, so you know where we're coming from, when we look at whether to accept an engagement, we look at three things. Do we have the right question? Because, you know, get the right question. Secondly, is it the right timing? Is the community ready to take some action? Because people don't want to volunteer their time, and you don't want to listen to another plan that sits on a shelf. And so is they're ready to make a decision and just need a little strategic guidance? And thirdly, get the right people. And I can assure you, from working with them, from knowing them, you have the right people. We have a terrific panelist group. Then the background, we asked the staff to put together background work on the city. So we had lots of reading, lots of numbers, lots of statistics, looked at trends, that sort of thing, to get us ready to come. And let me say thank you to the whole city staff. Eric, your staff, Brad, thank you so much. Harold, Nancy, Julie, everybody was just terrific in putting that together, very professionally put together and very helpful. Then we get here and we tour, and we walk, we kick the bricks, we feel the place, and we go back more than once so that we really can get as good a sense as possible. We do interviews. I think yesterday we interviewed about 35 people from the community, property owners, residents, leadership. How many people here were interviewed yesterday? Yeah, thank you very much for coming back. Then the panel does deliberations. We put together our thoughts. We share what we've learned and what we've seen here and make recommendations, which you're hearing today. And then there will be a printed report in another month. So with that background, Eric, this is the study area that we were asked to look at. And it's basically City Center plus the Sports Authority site to the south, across the south of Hamden. And what were our thoughts about that? And the questions were, basically, to keep it simple, what scale and types of redevelopment should we be looking at that? Could we look at employment growth in this area? Can we motivate parties to invest in this area and to be part of the redevelopment? And what about transportation, vehicular and shuttles and so forth? So let's move on, and let's get right into what the opportunities are, because most of all, we saw tremendous opportunity. So Mark Goldberg, I'm going to ask you to take over.
Great, indeed. Good afternoon. Pleasure to be here, and let me just say that as a developer and as people involved in the real estate and community building, what we've seen in time immemorial, even going back to Rome, is that successful cities time after time after time reinvent themselves for the societal changes that are happening at any one point. And what we are talking about today, and why Inglewood really has such substantial opportunity to reinvent itself and really be responsive to not only its community, but how it fits into kind of the greater metroplex of Denver. There are some outstanding basic elements that this city has that other cities and other communities would, do almost anything, bend over backwards to have in place at the time that we are at the precipice of what is changing in our society today. That can make, with some leadership, really advance what Inglewood can be for its citizens in the future. So let's talk about some of these basic bones. First of all, the land area and the study area that we talked about in and of itself, City Center. It's a large, good-sized critical mass of real estate. It has some opportunities that are ready to go for redevelopment, with some study that we'll talk about later and how those things can knit together. So the fact that the real estate is so large and has such great opportunity is in itself an important element. Some of the basic things that are absolutely necessary. You're at the crossroads of the metropolitan area's two most important critical arterials, South Santa Fe Drive and Hampton Avenue. Probably carry, I don't know how many, but I'm guessing over 100,000 cars probably an hour in the AM and PM commute times. It is at that, you're at that crosshairs that make it an important multimodal transportation. How many cities would like to have light rail? It's here. It doesn't have to come, it's here, and it is the oldest light rail line in the RTD system. There's substantial, almost, there's overcapacity in your dry and wet utilities. No future investment probably is needed other than probably changing some places. Those are costs that have already been made. Those payments have already been made and will serve the redevelopment and other areas around City Center. So the housing, you know, what makes a community? What's going to make a community in the future? Would you rather have, to appeal to millennials, large suburban homes that people are moving out as rapidly as they can, or the smaller homes that are affordable for millennials? They're looking for that smaller, affordable home. It's what they can afford because, as we all know, they're burdened with debt. And as the millennials start to form families, they're late to doing this. Millennials are doing a lot of things that my generation didn't do, but they're starting families later. And when they start families, they're going to look for affordable housing, a placemaking, a place that they can visit, a comfortable spot, and that's what the housing stock is existing in Englewood today. So it isn't like you would, if you were to place it, you would be building smaller, affordable homing, but you have it here. The other really important thing that's important to millennials and important to all of us for that matter is authentic places. There's no more authentic place than South Broadway. It's organic, and it can be built upon and enhanced to not only serve what's there today, but it can grow, and it can grow into City Center to be even a more authentic place. You don't have to go very far. All I have to do is go up on Broadway into Denver, around the Ellsworth and the Baker neighborhood to see what Broadway can be. There are high-tone restaurants. My daughter lives in San Francisco. She travels here. Where does she meet her pals? On South Broadway in the Baker neighborhood. So that shopping district can be here. It's going to take some investment and some thought, but it's authentic and is something that doesn't need to be replicated. An employment base, highly important, where people want to work and live. You're blessed to have that medical center already in Arvada, or I'm sorry, in Englewood. The Craig Hospital and the Swedish Medical Center are highly important to you, and building upon that base will be, I think, the future of what employment base can be, what we feel the employment base can be in the Englewood City Center. Those need to be partners that need to be brought into the conversation. But not only for the hospital itself, but the sector of technology that supports medical is the future where employment can be. It isn't after you go out and reach for an industry. You've got an industry here today. One of the more critical things, no need for RFPs and RFQs. You already have the development partners in place. Kimco owns the area shown as 24, the purple area in City Center today. Kimco is thought to be one of the most advanced, clear-thinking, mixed-use developers in the country, if not the U.S., one of the highly regarded real estate investment trusts. Etkin Johnson has been in Colorado for years, a very thoughtful, philanthropic leadership, really good developers and sought after by other communities. They're here. They own lots 50 and 51, and that is a development area that is ready to go. Red, I'm sorry. Weingarten Real Estate Investment Trust owns a good part of City Center in 17 and 10, one of the largest retail development organizations in the country. The Bristol Group, another clear thinking and very advanced development group out of San Francisco, owns a critical spot in lot 28. Kroger, how many people want a grocery store to come to their area to activate? You've got the country's leading U.S. grocer right here. These are your partners. These are the people that should be immediately brought into the conversation about development, and you can be better placed with these basic things that are already here. Let me hand it over to Mark, who's going to kind of do some illustrative work for you to show you how this thing could work.
Great. Thank you, Mark. So here we go. This is kind of where all the sort of the rubber hits the road, in my view anyway, in my selfish point of view. We started looking at this thing, and we started looking at the town center area over here, and then as we talked to all these people, these 35 people and all these interviews, and by the way, I just want to mention, even with the 4 or 5 interviews that I did, I gathered so much information, it couldn't all go on here. It's just too much. We couldn't even deal with all the information that we were given. So I apologize in advance if the good information you gave us just didn't make it on the drawing here. But, and thank you for all that. But we started, the obvious place to start looking would be the town center, but then as we got dug into this thing and all the information, we started to hear from people about South Broadway. And we began to realize South Broadway, like Mark just pointed out, has really great bones. It has all kinds of things going for it right now. And it needs a little bit of help from the city to push it to the next level. And why not do that? That's where your sort of low-hanging fruit opportunity lies right now, right in the present. And so that makes sense to us as the place to start. Now, this thing is not, there we go. So that we think that is your starting point. Now, the other place, sort of following closely on its heels, would be over at the city center, but we've coupled that with the area to the south of that, the Sports Authority property. And we think that if you put all that together, that becomes an activity center that could really anchor that end of Hamden and also what we're calling the Main Street, which is Inglewood Parkway. And so we've shown here, starting at the top, the apartment building that's across the street. We're sort of suggesting that maybe the ownership could look at repurposing that a little bit because it's a little rough right now. And maybe we're suggesting the arts community here needs, you have a great start with the museum. And why not play off of that, leverage that, grow that into something much bigger, and bring artists into the area, go out and get them and bring them, sort of recreate that apartment complex as artist studio with a fabrication space at the north end, and at the south end of it, which is right across the plaza here, and it's always been empty retail space, why not put the museum over in there? That might make some sense to sort of build some, and the synergy of all those things together could make that a terrific development. The space where the city hall is now, and we looked at, and we kicked around whether to keep it and try to repurpose it, or whether to raise it and do something different there. And you can reuse this building, but no matter what you do, it's never going to serve its new use as well as it did when it was a department store. And so the compromises would have to be made all along the way, and it's just never going to be ideal. And what we are suggesting here, and it's just a suggestion, but based on the interviews, it seems like it makes some sense, that it would be a full-service hotel/conference center. And in talking to the 2 hospitals, they are, one of them in particular, and now I'm blanking on which one it was, Craig, they currently do annual conferences up in Vail, and they bring in thousands of people every year, and they have 30 speakers from all over the world and all over the country, and they would go nuts if they had that place right there right now. And also as a hotel, they always need places to put people. And so you've almost sort of got a guaranteed pool of sort of visitor guests to fill guest rooms right off the bat. So it would seem to us that the feasibility of that as a hotel is really there and makes some sense. We're suggesting, and then south on the Sports Authority property, we are really focusing that on employment. And there's a lot of other things that it could be. It could be the City Hall sort of site. It could be a future rec center. It could be a number of things. But we ended up feeling like what we really need to plug in here is some kind of employment and really get a big employer right there. And then I'm just going to say that then the gap in between Broadway and the station area then will fill in over time. You have the properties that Mark described, these really partnerships that look extremely viable based on the conversations we had yesterday that are, in some cases, ready to happen as soon as 2 years out. And some not so soon, but over time, those areas will fill in, those opportunities will come forward, and if you have a master plan in place before they come to the front door and knock on your door, then you'll be ready, and you'll be ready with some instructions going forward. I think that's it. Now I'm going to turn this over to Jim Charlier, our transportation and parking consultant. Jim?
Good afternoon. So transportation often is the thing that drives everything else, and it shouldn't be that way. It should be driven by our goals and objectives for the kind of community we want. So we think transportation should serve your broader objectives. And there are many things we could talk about, but we're just going to focus on 4 big ideas for you. One is the idea of a spine facility, transit, the pedestrian environment, and parking. So next. The idea of a spine street may seem obvious, but what's not obvious is, as Mark just explained, this is not all going to happen at once. It's going to happen over years. So it's going to be important for you to know that Englewood Parkway, this thing that's out there today and works reasonably okay today, is going to have to evolve over time, and you are going to need to know as a city what do you want it to look like. That spine is going to be incredibly important because it's what ties together all of these, the 2 ends of the barbell, as Mark was explaining, and it's the axle around which all of these development wheels are going to revolve. Next, please. And what you have out there today can do okay for today. It's a little funky. It's 20 feet wide, and I want to bring my bike down here and ride that sidewalk. I think that would be fun. I noticed some kids doing that, and so, but there's no on-street parking. There's no wide sidewalk. There's a lot that you'll have to address over the years. It's okay today. It's actually nice that you didn't overbuild it. It's narrow. So it's not too wide. It's basically just a drive aisle through parking lots today. That's an okay place to start. And I'll come back on the point of design in a minute when I show the pedestrian slide. But the point to keep in mind is that it needs to work for all modes. It should work for cars and trucks, yes, but it should work for transit buses. It should work for pedestrians and for bicycles as well. Next, please. And one of your biggest assets here is transit. And we know, obviously, everybody thinks of this place as a light rail served destination, especially city center itself. There's a lot more than that going on here. Next, please. This is also an area that is very well served by bus routes. Anybody who spends any time in this area notices all the buses coming through on the various streets. Obviously, a lot of them circulate through the transit center itself. And you have the ART shuttle here, which I want to comment more on. Next, please. A lot of times you look at something like this and you think, well, that's a cute little neighborhood circulator. This is the 3rd best transit route in the RTD system. It's a highly used, well utilized, low cost per passenger. You probably can't see all the data in that graphic, and it's a little bit out of date anyway because RTD only does this occasionally, but the top 4 entries on that table, 3 of them are in Boulder. And the People's Republic, drive to the edge of reality and turn left. And the other one is the ART shuttle here in Englewood, serving Englewood City Center. Next, please. And you have pretty much an ideal transit market here. And so a next step for you is going to be to begin to think about these user groups and how you help them with transit. For example, the shuttle runs, anybody know? 6:30 to 6:30, right? Well, guess what? The hospitals run 12-hour shifts, 5 to 5 and 7 to 7. So none of them can use this schedule. It's already running, it's already busy, already has a lot of passengers, a lot of opportunity for improvements. Next, please. The route is really pretty ideal. It's nice and simple. This is what successful transit routes look like. This, operating through that spine I was just talking about, could be one of the things that helps tie things together and connect those developments. Next, please. Obviously, for City Center to succeed, most importantly, more important than anything else, it has to be walkable. It has to be a strong pedestrian environment. Show me a strong commercial district without a pedestrian environment. It'll be the first one I ever saw. So this is critically important. Realize we're trying to serve a variety of users with a variety of capabilities. Next, please. So some of these things that we've done will have to be addressed over the years. Next, please. We know what great streets look like. I'm cheating here. This is Newberry and Back Bay. I don't know if anybody's been on Newberry, but it's like one of the best shopping streets in North America. But you know, let me suggest it's not out of the realm of possibility that City Center could have a street like this. And next, please. But that means that all of those components have to be put in place. The street, the on-street parking, the pedestrian travelway, the managing the building setbacks, providing a coherent street wall, all of that stuff's not there today, and all of that stuff will have to be done. The special challenge for you is it's going to happen one parcel at a time over a lot of years. And so you're going to have to know what it is you want so that as it happens, you're building towards that long-term vision, as Mark Goldberg was explaining earlier. Next, please. Now, interesting. Everybody has noticed this. I'm not telling you something you didn't already know. Parking is one of our most expensive urban assets. In your area, it's very expensive because it's consuming 70% of the land. So it's not just expensive in terms of building it and maintaining it. It's expensive in terms of the opportunity cost associated with what could be out there if it wasn't all parking. So over the years, you're going to want healthy economic development, you're going to want mixed land uses, and you're going to want all that surface parking to change into other things, into buildings. Next, please. And so how do you do that? Well, you can't, nobody can do it by themselves. In suburban areas, you say, all right, everybody's got to provide their own parking on their own site. Everybody has their own parking field, as they say. That's great in suburban areas. It doesn't work at all in urban areas. Next. So as Englewood City Center becomes urban, you're going to have to start thinking about parking as being a utility. You don't make everybody drill a water well on their site, right? You don't make everybody dispose of their sanitary sewer waste. Parking is like that. When you get in a commercial mixed-use district, it's a shared activity. Next, please. And so eventually you will have to address the question of how do we create that kind of park once district where we collaborate and we cooperate among a variety of public and private land uses and share this parking and make use of the shared resource. Next, please. And the way that's typically done is through a parking district. I'm showing you the garage in Boulder. Some of you know about Central Area General Improvement District in Boulder that manages all the parking. I can build a building in downtown Boulder. I don't have to provide any parking. But I do pay a property tax that funds all of the activities that are listed up there. And I share parking with all the other landowners. It works, a system that works beautifully, even though you'll learn everybody always complains about parking no matter what you've done and no matter how well it's actually working. Next, please. And so, just to wrap up, you know, so all four of these things are sort of the highlights of things that you'll need to address over the next decade or two as you develop City Center. And with that, I will turn it over. This gets better as we go along to Sarah Rockwell.
Thank you very much. So now we're going to zoom out a little bit. We've zoomed in, and now we need to talk about implementation and zooming out. And one of the things we talked about is we can't come to the end of this project that we're doing and tell them to do more planning. But we're telling you that you do need to do more planning. First of all, we know that you have a comprehensive plan that has gone through a lot of work and is currently in front of the City Council, and we highly recommend that you adopt that comprehensive plan. It's really important for the city as a whole to have a vision, to recognize the citizens' vision for the city, to also create the legal basis for future regulatory or planning actions that you implement. And so the comprehensive plan really needs to be in place to establish sort of the first element of the visioning and regulatory structure for the city. But after the comprehensive plan, you've seen one effort to sort of create a quick area plan. Well, a real area plan involves, it's a longer process. It involves involvement of the community, involvement of the stakeholders, the property owners, to really hone in on some of the things that these gentlemen have been talking about in terms of transportation, land use, infrastructure needs, utilities, et cetera, but to really establish a plan for this particular area. And that's important not only to establish the community's vision, but also because it sets expectations for the wider community and for potential investors in Englewood. It says, we're Englewood, this is what we want to have happen here, and we are going to use our resources, whatever they may be, to help this vision be achieved. So I can't emphasize enough the importance of area planning. And if you think about projects around Denver that have been successful, they've all involved some planning up front that sets forth the vision. And a couple of examples of that. Oh, and let me just, before we go to the next slide, let me just tell you that we highlighted in your comprehensive plan draft, so this isn't inconsistent with what the comp plan is already recommending. It says, create a master plan for Englewood City Center and downtown that looks to reconfigure vehicle access to transit and parking to increase users' exposure to retail and enhance the streetscape. So it's contemplating that there's a more specific plan for this area. And so, next slide, please. Let me just give you one example. Here's the community plan that was done for what's now called, previously called Buckley Annex. It's now called Boulevard 1. But this is the area just to the west of existing Lowry between Monaco and Quebec, Alameda and First Avenue. That's the plan that went through a lot of community input, albeit controversial. But that plan is now being implemented. Investors are coming in, developers are coming in, and they're doing stuff. And it's partly because that plan was there and really set the vision for that area. Another example, next slide please. Here's an example in Arvada. This is the Arvada TOD area. And again, this was a larger station area plan for this area, but it set forth what the expectations were that Arvada had for the community, and based on that plan, they were able to go out and issue a request for proposals for developers to come in and do parts of this project, which has happened. So the visioning and the planning is very important. It doesn't mean that you stop the other activities that Erica is going to talk about, but this needs to be really sort of the backbone and the fundamental part of your efforts to move forward. And with that, I will pass this over to Erica, who will talk about more implementation. Oh, is that your slide or my slide? I can't remember.
Either one of us. So.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I have one more slide. Let me talk a little bit about city leadership and partners. Along with this visioning and planning, you have some great city staff who are really excited to get this going. And one of the things that we would really like to recommend is that they start by doing a lot of outreach. We understand that many of these large property owners that we've been talking about, that the city may not have actually been speaking to them recently, and that's a really important thing to do, to just call these folks up on the phone, go down and meet with them if necessary, but really sit down with them and say, we're interested in hearing your thoughts, here are our thoughts, let's talk about how we can work together. And engaging those partners will be really important in this process. And those partners are both large property owners and small property owners, and they all have a stake in the future of this area. It's important to, as I said, engage them proactively, and then to be ready to act, to have the tools in place, the plans in place, so that when they're ready to act, you're ready to act. So now, with that, I will pass this over to Erica.
Great. And so just speaking about tools in particular, and one of the keys here is to understand that we didn't want to just put up the pretty picture. We really have been thinking all the way through and wanted to share with you some of the ideas about how this is actually going to happen. Certainly there are a lot of assets, as Mark wanted to start, we all wanted to start out by saying, and you did so well. But in addition to that, there probably will need to be tools that the city uses to help bring a vision into reality. And so certainly we've talked a little bit about the plan and planning as a tool. And and then that really leading into the first one up there, which is the land use authority that the city has, making sure that the policy is set, making sure that the zoning and regulatory framework is set to allow the things that are part of the vision and to make those smooth, easy, you know, creating that sort of welcome mat for what it is that you do want. So certainly that's a key. Another piece that is just wonderful here is that the city, and through some foundations and so forth, the city has control and influence over quite a good amount of land in this area, and has that as a tool to be part of a public-private partnership, to potentially swap in some cases, to hold, to use those assets in a variety of ways to really be at the table with folks and to start thinking about how to influence what happens out here. That the importance of that, while it's in some ways obvious, can't be overstated just because you know, sometimes the city doesn't have as many assets to bring to the table. Here, the land is a key one. Another one that's great is the employees that are here. You guys are an important part of making the uses in this area work, and it's critical, we think, that over the long haul that the city continue to stay in this area, the employees as an asset, and the facilities, so that, and those could be part of mixed use. They don't have to be in the existing space, but we really see, if we're creating something that is the center of the city, and we want it to really resonate that way, that the city does need to stay within this area in the long haul. Certainly, as all the pieces are moving, there may be need to be flexibility at times, but we really see this as where the city should stay. And then, you know, thinking about public financing tools, one of the great things is you haven't tapped those all out. There's a lot of things that are out there that are potentials. What we really see as the recommendation isn't so much that there's something that needs to just be put in place over the whole area necessarily up front at this time, but really because you have these the opportunity to work with great partners is engaging them, figuring out what the project that their interest is, matching that with this vision we've been talking about, both what's already in the comp plan, which is a great basis, a great start, and then as well going forward into that kind of more detailed area plan, understanding that the market, there are so many assets here that the market can bring some change. The community has very high expectations for what that change is, and so there may at times be a gap between what the vision is and what will come about. And so the city has these tools, can create these tools on a case-by-case basis, perhaps district-wide over time if needed, but really looking first at what can the partnership bring to the table, and then what does the city need in a specific instance, rather than a more blanket approach is what we're recommending at this time on finance tools. Next slide. Okay, I lost one, but anyway, I'm going to turn it over now to James.
Thank you. Thank you, Erica. So my primary focus tends to be in the retail sector. And when we talk about planning and land use and topics like that, doesn't really touch the people. Most of the people who live in our communities, they interact together for the first time, typically in retail space. So when we think about retail, I get very passionate about this, and I define retail and vibrant streets with this definition. Vibrant street is a neighborhood's core. It's an environment that's treasured by its residents, customers, and business owners, whose daily action ensures its enduring vitality. And I think there's a number of these traits that can be applied and that reflected in Broadway. We have that here. It's already here in place. I think there's a real significant opportunity to enhance Broadway. Next slide, please. Kind of, what are some of the typical things that make up a vibrant street? The first one is that it's a targeted and defined area. In all of the research and studies that I've completed regarding vibrant streets, I found that they're most successful when they're less than 4 or 5 blocks. Here, Broadway targeted is about 2.5 blocks, and I think that's perfect for this community. Perfect. I would not want to see it extend to 6 or 8. What happens is, as you extend it, they tend to get repetitive and also start to die off. There's only so much that a community can support. So it's currently in a perfect configuration. The second is retail appropriate space and storefronts. Check that box. We already have that here in Englewood. So great. Next is a mix of retail uses. Are there food and beverage components? Is there, fashion and other soft goods components? Is there home furnishings? Yes, yes, and yes. So Broadway's on its way. Does it have a unified brand? That's somewhere I think that could be an opportunity for Englewood. If I say to you Cherry Creek, I think everybody has a vision of what that is. If I say Englewood downtown, you all have a vision, but if somebody from the north side of Denver, if I said that, do they have a vision? So I think that's one area that could be a potential opportunity, is create that branding. Is Englewood keep it weird, like Austin uses, or something fun in that nature? So think of a way to unify the brand around downtown. Next slide, please. As it relates to Broadway specifically, there's great existing architecture, there's a passionate community supporting it, and there's an opportunity for emerging retail with room to grow. And I think that's an extremely positive thing. Next slide, please. As it relates to the West End, this is an area where City Center is, down south to the former Sports Authority complex. I really think it's important to highlight that retail follows growth. It does not create it on its own. So retail is much more of a parasite than it is a creator of growth. So I would, on the West End, let's capitalize on the former Sports Authority site, create a pedestrian connection that feels safe and welcoming. That was a big topic that came up in my interviews, was that crossing Hamden from the south to the north side is a little bit of a scary proposition. And finding a way to make that safe and welcoming, I think, is a critical step. The next thing is there's a significant amount of vacancy existing along Englewood Parkway and around the circle. I think there's a way to get creative with that space, literally, even including adding artisans. How about finding artists and bring them in with gallery spaces? Or I know the topic of Big Wonderful came up. These are guys who are always looking for a home for interesting concepts. There's alternative kind of spaces popping up at 38th and York, and Winter Session just went there. They're manufacturing bags and cycling bags. They could be a potential candidate there. Now, you might have to work with Weingarten because they might have a pro forma rent that's above what these folks could pay, but maybe the city could help in a way to subsidize, because nothing fosters vacancy like other vacancy. It starts to feed on itself once it starts to happen. And activating space, let's take, what if MOA moved out of this location and into the storefronts? That's a potential way to activate. There's resources the city might have to fill those spaces, even with quasi-retail. You know, a few city offices could take up, and just activating them with storefronts, making them look retail appropriate with awnings. Just those are kind of initial things that could happen, and I think would create some vibrancy in the short term while the rest of it's all coming online. And I think the plaza outside could also be activated. That was another topic. Could there be a farmer's market once a month, or car shows, or things like that that occur kind of in that cul-de-sac at the end of Englewood Parkway right in front of the front door? So those are just some initial ideas. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Marilee.
One of the best quotes we heard in the interview was, "City Center is the only bet we have." And we saw that too. To have that great piece of ground in a region where it's so hard to find land is a tremendous opportunity. It's also your downtown. Has there ever been a great city that doesn't have a great downtown? So you've got Broadway as the start, you've got a great piece of ground, and you've got a lot of infrastructure and going for it. So it's really important that you prioritize City Center Englewood and take it to the next level. You heard how enthusiastic we are. You know, the bones, I mean, there's so much investment here. Part of it was made when it became City Center 16 years ago. More of it will happen as we go forward. But there's a lot to build on, and you ought not waste it. The barbell vision is really where we came out. We fell in love with Broadway. We love the idea of adding the lights there, closing off the street, maybe having more street events, you know, activating that area, working with the merchants, capitalizing on the authentic history of this community. It's really been the lifeblood for a long time. But then let's look at the West End too, and this area. tremendous infrastructure here, great opportunity. We see the Sports Authority site. I mean, look what it's got. From a developer standpoint, it's got great traffic on Santa Fe and on Hamden. It's got a light rail station. It's got access, visibility, you know, and it's got all the infrastructure and the residential population around it. It's just waiting to happen. So we see that as a pretty short-term opportunity, but we don't want Sports Authority to be isolated. We want to link it with a pedestrian bridge right up to this area, so it's really looked at as one area, and the activity in where the City Hall is now, where that area activates Sports Authority and vice versa, and bring in jobs because they are good long-term support. This is going to be an evolution. There's short-term things that we think you should be doing. We've talked about some of them. There's longer-term things that you also have to have in mind, because when there's opportunities that present themselves, and I promise you they will, you have to have an answer. You have to have it on your terms, and you deserve to have it on your terms. That calls for active leadership from this community. Do not be reactive. And that's public sector and private sector, but probably at this point, a lot to the public sector. It means that you have to reach out to the private partners. Those private partners bring you money, they bring you expertise, they bring you a lot of risk capital that isn't appropriate for the public sector to take. They're the ones that are going to step up and all of a sudden make the transformation for you. So reaching out to them and counting them partners is really essential. When people talk about area plans, yeah, it's another plan. I see it as an action plan. That tells you what you're going to do. And more importantly, it's your sales document for when you go talk to investors, to the developers. You have some large property owners. Any one of those could do something that would be an immediate catalyst for all the other things around it. You know, developers are lemmings. They kind of follow each other. So that action plan, that sales document is really important. And telling your story. I talked to the mayor yesterday about some terrific ideas for telling the story. Inglewood is the best kept secret in the metro area. Maybe you don't want the secret to get out. I know there are some thoughts about that. But it really has great opportunity. So a lot of the ideas about celebrating your successes, you know, state of the city, parties, more gatherings, more programming, investing in telling the story, I think makes a lot of sense. But mostly and finally, what's most important is aligned political will. Everybody has to be on the same page saying, yes, that's where we're going. And you may not agree on everything else, but you've got to agree on this area. And I'll tell you firsthand, developers call me all the time and say, Marilee, what are the good jurisdictions to work in? Because there's good guys and bad guys. There's places where you can get things done, where people understand what you're trying to do. There's someone to talk to, and they have vision, and they're willing to be partners with you and stand shoulder to shoulder with you. And there's other communities where you're on your own, and your chances for getting blocked are huge. And I tell them who the good guys are. So there is a huge informal information network. And when the political leadership isn't aligned, that's where you fall into trouble. All of a sudden, the good developers, the investors that you already have on site say, yeah, I know, it's not doing the best it could, but we're going to let it go. I'm going to move on to where I can get something done. So not only because of the community and because the people that live and work and care so much about this community deserve it, but because there is a tremendous opportunity for your future sustainability to bring in jobs and quality of life. We really urge you to take action, come together, and let me close by saying thank you for inviting us in, and we would be delighted to take questions at this point. And James has to walk out the door. He's got to fly to the East Coast. But thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Yeah, I'm sorry, sir.
With respect to the political will, there's a number of people that are in the community there's a number of people in the community that still see the old Cinderella City, and that, you know, all the income that Cinderella City brought in, and they lived here, they raised their kids, they're kind of in a retirement mode, you know, and a lot of, and I hope, I don't know how many city council people are here, but this political will is something that it seems like as a developer in the area to get people behind us. How do you guys address that when you're part of the, trying to be one of the private partners?
How do you bring the political will?
How do you bring political will to people that have a mindset that's, like I said, it's currently kind of the people that grew up in Cinderella City, and they're still living in Cinderella City in their mind, but there's no income coming in from the Cinderella City story.
Yeah. Anybody here want to jump in on that? Mark?
Well, as it relates specifically to Cinderella City, here is the thinking about retail, real estate, and particularly malls. And, you know, if there's any question about that, pick up the Wall Street Journal or any newspaper or any publication at any day and trying to find out what's happening to brick and mortar real estate. It is simply giving away. I mean, we are advanced in technology, and internet sales is something that every retailer, if they're not on board with it, they shortly will be on board with it. So the thinking is that there's going to be 2 malls in every major metropolitan area, only 2. And the rest of them will go by the wayside. So to think what happened to Cinderella City also happened to Bear Valley, Westminster Mall, University Hills. It's just an attrition of how we are shoppers. It's a reality. So you can keep your head in the sand if you're and think that Cinderella City is going to come back, but that's where your head will be. So retail is changing. Where retail is versus where it isn't is in this small, compact, very accessible artisan boutique restaurant retail, highly successful. So I would say to those who are still think that Cinderella City is going to pop out of the ground, ain't going to happen, but here's what is.
I would just add to that you know, elected officials are elected, and they all have a constituency, and I think they need to hear from their constituency what they want to see. And at some point, if they're not hearing from the residents and from the businesses what they want to see and what they believe in, they're not going to change their mind. You know, all the education in the world, all the talking, but the most convincing people are the people they represent. And it's, you know, it's tough.
Marilee, I have one other comment on that,
please,
which is field trips.
Oh, that's a good idea.
I really think that sometimes, you know, both staff and elected officials, they get their mindset on the way they think something will look or what they're concerned about. And if you actually take them and show them successful examples and have them really be able to walk around and look at them and see how they feel, that it really changes it changes the sense of things, and it also gets a lot of people on the same page. Downtown Denver does this urban exploration trip every year. We go to different cities and we look at the best practices of other cities to see what they're doing. We take elected officials, we take planning staff, we take members of the community, and everybody comes back with this sort of shared vision of something cool that maybe could happen in downtown Denver. And I think those kinds of things also really help.
And sometimes you can just stay in the metro area and see a lot of good examples,
exactly,
too.
right.
That's true. Any other comments or questions, sir?
First of all, I really appreciate your ideas as far as reactivating the city center with things like artistic space, and even maybe using some of those city resources to move into those you know, unleased and unused spaces. What do you guys see as the maybe the critical mass necessary? And would that include some residential aspects like apartment complexes and mixed use with kind of ground level retail with residential up top coming in, or anything like that to kind of bring more people just naturally to the area rather than having to have it be a destination?
Erica, you want to take a crack at that?
Sure, I'll start and then maybe others can join in. You know, I don't know that there's a single number threshold, but what we do see is quite a bit of potential for mixed-use development that would intensify the uses, that would add more diversity of mixes, and there certainly is at this time good demand for residential. I think, you know, we've heard a lot from the community about what their favorite kinds of residential are, and many of those can be a fit. There's certainly a challenge with the fact that right now construction defects law makes ownership multifamily units difficult, and that's probably not something that can be resolved locally. What we're seeing in a lot of places is folks that are building to a standard that can be converted in the long run, and so if the market is there for the ownership units, it will happen. And so we're encouraging communities to be open-minded about, let's see the, you know, good design, mixed use in some cases as part of mixed use development, and see these units happen for which there is market demand. And should the market also be there for conversions, that will happen long term, but trying not to dictate over much. You know, I think the world has changed quite a bit to where those folks that you know, weren't in housing when they watched the housing bubble, there's a lot of folks that just don't have the same interest in ownership for a variety of reasons, be it their debt, be it their image of self as having a more multi-city life, you know, whatever it is. And so trying not to get too caught up on some particular image of a renter and be more open-minded to quality housing that is available. We see so much potential on this site. That's one of the reasons that we looked at putting the city center or city offices in sort of in those center areas, is that we see residential potential both closer to the transit and closer to Broadway. Some of those interior locations could have a mix of uses as well going forward. But so I don't know that there's one sort of residential critical mass that we're looking for, more that we're looking that there's good potential, and the developers that are out there have an orientation towards creating that right balance and mix of uses, and being willing to embrace those mixes and see that come to the street and create that urban form organically, more than wait for some particular threshold number. Anyone want to join any more of that?
Well, let me just follow up on the issue of apartments, because it came up. And I will offer you this, that the millennials who are living in these apartment buildings are, as a group, the largest group that has ever existed that has the lowest investment in home ownership. They're also the highest educated group that this country has ever produced. So what people have in their mind about what an apartment dweller is somewhat colloquial. They think it is something that they, you know, families that can't afford home ownership, and it's absolutely not that. So it's just a matter of how they choose, or how they have chose to invest their dollars when it comes to housing. So again, maybe a little field trip might be warranted to find out who's living in apartment buildings. The other thing that I would tell you about you know, what kind of development here in critical masses is that I would encourage the city leadership here to think big. Think that you have a responsibility to build on existing infrastructure in a large way, very urban, very vertical, and in mixed use. And I mean that, and we discussed it in our group over the last 2 days, how important it is to have dense vertical development. Discussions of parking and so forth go along with that.
We didn't have time here to talk about a lot of the other uses. I mentioned employment, maker spaces, small footprint office space. There's a lot of entrepreneurism that goes on. And so as you think about the filling in of those parking lots with other kinds of uses, absolutely lots of residential. There's a huge demand for that of all kinds. Rental and for sale once we get the legal thing fixed out with the construction defects. But also office space, small office space, artistic space, creative placemaking is one of the biggest rages around the country right now. And then retail as well. The retail will not have the same square footage that you have now. It's struggled. I mean, the community can't support it. As Mark said, it's all cutting back. So much of it's going online. You've got Broadway. You want to support Broadway. There'll be other retail that comes in. Food and beverage, huge. You know, there's a lot more you could do with food and beverage as part of that as well. So there's a mix of uses. And if we didn't say that clearly, I just really want to emphasize it. A lot of uses. And government and public, and not-for-profit entities, nonprofits. Everything you can jam into this city center, we want you to jam in. Any other comments? Sir.
Thank you. Really appreciated that presentation. A quick question. You mentioned placemaking and walkability. Could you talk a little bit, especially outside of the city center here? It's some nice space, the fountain, the green space, but not necessarily the most positive uses at all time. Could you talk a little bit, if you discussed at all, about how to activate some of those spaces, especially with the vacancies and with the potential for walkability from the light rail?
Who wants to jump in? Mark Leese, do you want to try to take it first?
So work? Okay. Well, one of the things, it goes back to what I think it was James that said, that the retail is more of a parasite. It doesn't take the lead on that kind of stuff. And you know what he's saying is, first thing you want to do is you want to bring employment in, and you need residential, and then the retail will follow. So in terms of priority, it's really the employment and the residential, and then ultimately you get the retail uses will follow that, and they'll come in and fall into place. But the other piece of that, since it's sort of in my bailiwick, is that, and also Jim over here, because Jim had the little slide with the street section, the sidewalk section, and showing kind of typically, you know, what works. You divide the sidewalk up into an amenity zone and a walking zone and all those kinds of parts, and you add that up and you end up with a minimum dimension for a good, healthy sidewalk. And, you know, and all of that stuff has been evolving over the last, well, in my lifetime anyway. And like James pointed out, Newberry, who was it?
Newberry Street.
That was Jim. That was Jim. That street is just, you know, it's just a great pedestrian street. And there are a number of those around the U.S. Not a huge number of them. I mean, I think, but in Denver, I think there are a half dozen that are sort of almost at that level. But that one is really like way out there. And but once you have the employment, the residential, the retail then falls into place. And if you've set the stage properly with the pedestrian amenities and the accessibility, and make sure that from end to end on this Inglewood Parkway, it is absolutely accessible for pedestrians and handicapped from end to end, and that has to take priority over vehicular travel or movements. But those are the kind of the two parts to me. Kind of get the table set, get the right ingredients, and then you can bake your cake.
So let me ask the question. Do you know Walk Score? Are you familiar with Walk Score? All right. Well, I would pull it up and goof around with it with Englewood and maybe other places you know, because you learn a lot from it. Walk Score looks at some transportation features, the nature of the street grid and so forth, but mainly it's about mixed use. Mainly what Walk Score allocates high points for are places where there are a lot of activities. And that's pretty smart. If you think about what creates pedestrians, it's pedestrians. When you have people walking because they're getting between things, it creates this place that looks like a busy, interesting place, and pretty soon people go there because that's where there's a lot of people, right? And we as humans, we love to promenade, we love to be around, we're social, we want to be in that kind of busy place where all kinds of stuff is going on. You can't create pedestrians by providing places for them to walk. What you have to do is provide places for them to walk to and from, and then a way to do that. So the question that came earlier, I would add, you know, a good way to think about these ideas in the context of Englewood City Center is think about a complete neighborhood. What would a complete neighborhood look like? We used to live in complete neighborhoods. Complete neighborhood is a place where the kids go to school, you can go shopping. You know, maybe you don't do your big 20 150 toilet paper roll by at Costco. But you get your, all of us today, I'm going to guess, hit grocery stores 4 or 5 times a week, 3 or 4 times a week, especially if you like to buy fresh fruits and vegetables because they don't keep. And so that kind of stuff, hey, where you work, the third place, where you hang out, where you play. Is there a coffee shop? Is there a good neighborhood tavern where you can sit and talk to people you know? Parks, open space, are there places for the kids to play? Are there places where you can go and throw a Frisbee with your grandson, which I like to do? That kind of stuff. If that's all present in a neighborhood, that becomes a gold standard. And you can measure that to some degree just by looking at walk score. And it's a good way to kind of organize how you think about it.
I just said, yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I would just mention that we thought a lot about that space in the sense that I think, sometimes the vacancy and that's on that plaza and a few challenges on that plaza, tend to give people a level of frustration about the overall what works and didn't work on this site in TOD 1.0. That is a high impact compared to when we looked at it and we saw how much the right bones were built, how many great things happened, and how much there is to build on. It's just necessary to say we thought a lot about the fact that, well, yes, we did all learn in the last 16 years, oops, even the modest amount of retail that we thought TOD could drive was an overestimate. And so we're probably going to need to rethink whether, how much retail can survive right at that spot. So starting to think about uses that do work and really are augmented by transit. I mean, transit doesn't really drive anything, as we've hit on several times, but the hotel, we've really heard that transit at this location, especially where it also has exposure to Hamden and Santa Fe, can really work, and transit can augment it. So we see that as a potentially very vibrant use that's got people coming and going a fair amount. They often have some internal services that could potentially be across that plaza. So long range, that use could really help that plaza. It also may need to be reconfigured. The way that the roadway goes through it now may not be necessary, or might be access for a hotel. Alternatives there, but in the short run, however, that's, I think, what James was bringing forward, was that because of the heavy impact that those vacancies have on people's perception of the place as a whole, this may be one of those places where we say it's so important to both our community's image of self and to the image we're trying to create and project, that we need to figure out a way to subsidize what's in there and create some vibrancy. Now, if it's not retail, there's other things that can create street level vibrancy. Retail is it is a great one, but there are office uses where people want transparency and they're willing to let you look in their windows. There are uses like fitness centers, museums, and particularly thinking about if this site were to change, where do we put the Museum of Outdoor Art, which is such a highly valued community asset and has to stay, again, just such a great thing to keep in the area. Boy, that would create incredible street level vibrancy, either, in the short run at this location, perhaps in the long run this location, perhaps continuing to evolve with the area, but thinking about the fact that not every space we would love to have small scale storefront retail can be filled with retail. What else do we put there? So that's a lot of pieces to say. We thought about it a lot. We thought about what uses can create vibrancy there, and we know that in the short run, while the market may not drive it, it may be important enough to just make it happen.
Any other questions? Am I missing anybody? Oh, right over here. Thank you.
Yeah, hi there. To your point, Erica, you had mentioned the mistakes or the things that we could have done differently 16 years ago, and what we've learned from that in the design and so on. And considering and just thinking a little bit about what we'll be looking at 16 years down the road, how can we plan, like, what are the kids learning in the classrooms right now excuse me, I'm a bit nervous. But what are they learning about, and what will the retail spaces need to be like at that point? Because the kids that are going to be the new millennials, whatever that generation is next, Gen I, okay? So those folks, they're thinking already differently than the millennials ever did in school, learning differently. And so, you know, in designing and planning for what these people will be wanting 20 years down the road, and what is their transportation going to look like, and sustainability and these things. Let's try that on.
I'll start, and others chime in as well. I think that you make a great point, which is that cities evolve, places evolve, and we have to do our best to create opportunity and flexibility, and also understand that if you look at this district, it's a multi-million-dollar real estate asset. It's not managed under one management. Any multi-million-dollar real estate asset that was managed by a management group would be continually expecting to reinvest and refresh itself. In fact, if we had, a mall owner, for example, that didn't do that didn't expect that some of what they built today would be different in 16 years, we would be frustrated with them and say that they weren't continuing to engage and invest the way we expected. So we need to understand as a community that we aren't going to, there's very, very few times where we're going to get an entire district that's just going to be what it is for 100 years. It will need to keep going on that refresh. So what we can do in the short run, I think that's one of the reasons that we were hesitant to overly prescribe the center. I think those things are going to phase themselves in probably over the next decade, and they are going to be responsive to market conditions. One thing we see folks doing, though, in some places, for example, where there is not currently the retail market to derive as much storefront as we want, is building first floors to commercial standard. Use them however you want right now. If your market will fill it with residential, that's fine, but you've got the bones in that building without a tear down to convert it over to another use when the market comes. So that's one of the visions that we see some communities embracing, is trying to enforce that some of the spaces be ready to evolve over time, and it's good long-term investment strategy, versus prescribing what use is there today. Anyone want to add to that?
You have one right there.
The question that you're asking is actually one that a billion-dollar industry is trying to answer. As I said in my earlier comments, there's not a major retailer today that's not trying to actually answer that question. But I'll give you some insights. So what we know about retail is probably two basic things. One, it's a way, or has been a way, of distribution of goods from manufacturer to consumer. And that's probably the thing that is the most confounding and changing right now. And I'll tell you about a piece that I wrote about that. But then the second piece is that retailing has also always been social. And the social aspect of retailing has been there with us from over the millenniums of years. People gathered in, if you think about hometown USA, it's where the farmers came in, they gathered, and they also they picked up their goods from the manufacturer that had been distributed. So that isn't going to change. What we do see, though, is that social piece becoming a more and more important element of it. So I think that might give us some insight into the future. As to the distribution thing, it won't be long, I believe, to where the thought is you dial it into your computer, the drone's manufacturing it on its own backside with a 3D printer, and it drops it in your lap. So I'm not sure that the distribution thing isn't going to be fast-tracked to something we can't even, or we can imagine. But the social aspect is going to continue.
I would also say that the transportation is going to change dramatically. So, build as little parking as you can right now, because the demand for parking is going to change, and so in a way you have a great landhold here. The other thing we've seen is that the rapidity of change has increased. So it used to be that you built a building and it lasted 40 or 50 years. And then there was 20 years. And now we're building, you know, $100 million arenas and saying 15 years later, oh, throw them away, we need a new one, right? It doesn't have whatever this and that. So don't be surprised. So flexibility is really important. But the basic part is what Mark said about the social gathering. So creating great places for people to come together. And I would say one of the more recent evolutions is for dogs to come together, right? You gotta have a place for your dog. Everybody has a dog. And so dog walking is a great social activity, especially if you're single, right? It's a great way to meet people. So I see that in my neighborhood all the time. So those kinds of things, the basics, the framework are there. And the role of the public sector is to provide the framework and to program activities and stuff. But let the risk-taking go to the private sector. Let them, the billion-dollar industry, figure that out and then work with them and let them take the risk, but bring it into your community. And then don't be surprised when it changes.
Can you just build over parking lots?
Yes, of course.
They will be the parking lots by those property owners, and those uses will change. And as the use changes, then the parking need will change. And if you get everybody talking to each other the way Jim suggested, and say, wait, let's not all, you know, build our own again. You have to start early because the changes happen over time. But you start another way of thinking that saves them money, so they come to the table, but also makes for a better social environment.
And a really good example of that, which you'll have some familiarity with, but it can be surprising to think back over the past 2.5 decades. Marilee remembers that back in around 1990 or so, we did a parking study for downtown Lodo area, the Central Platte Valley, which wasn't that much to look at back then, other than Larimer Square, which had started to happen. And people were talking about surface parking lots and how important they were. And I said, those are going to go away. And they said, what? And I said, no, they're going to go away. And we looked at the ownership, and the ownership they were speculative holdings. Now, here is a little different in that your parking is being held by businesses that are using it for their purposes. But what you know about as places densify and become more urban, which Englewood City Center will do, is that the surface parking is going to go away. It'll go away gradually. You want the market to kind of govern how fast that happens and how it happens. What you need to do as a city is sort of set in place the right kind of regulatory framework. The problem we have in North America right now is that good development's illegal in most cities, and so we need to provide a way through our regulatory mechanisms that people can do good development.
Great. Any final questions? Well, let me thank you on behalf of our panelists and ULI and the city. Thank you very, very much for having us in. We'll have our report to you in about a month. A written report that'll be available, and really wish you the best of luck.